If you're dealing with doubt today, I want to encourage you with what I read in my Bible this morning. I was reading in Matthew 11, and it starts with John the Baptist sending his disciples to ask Jesus if Jesus is really the Messiah, as it says in verses 2 and 3. When John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" And why this stood out is because this is the same John the Baptist who saw Jesus, who baptized him, who knew that he was the Messiah then, who saw heaven open and the Spirit descend on Jesus like a dove. And he not only saw Jesus, but he also heard the voice of God saying, "This is my Son whom I love, with him I am well pleased." So John saw with his own eyes, heard with his own ears, that Jesus is the Messiah. But yet he still had this time of doubt where he had to ask if Jesus truly was the Messiah or if they should expect someone else. And something that stood out to me about this is the fact that at this time, John has to send his disciples to ask Jesus because John himself is in prison. And if we notice in times in our life, usually the times that we are struggling with doubt are usually tougher times or when we're going through something tough. And we see here that John is in prison, so he begins to doubt because maybe he thought that if Jesus was the Messiah, he wouldn't let him be in prison. But I like Jesus' response to John's disciples. He says, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." So he reminds John of all the miraculous works that he's doing, of all that's going on. And sometimes that's just what we need most, is whenever we go to God with our doubts, he'll just remind us of the things that he's done and it helps us to believe. But then I also like what Jesus says to the crowd after John's disciples had left. Jesus wasn't upset with John for doubting, and he didn't look down on him for doubting. Instead, in verses 7 through 15, Jesus goes on to speak highly of John, and he doesn't talk bad about him at all. And so if you're dealing with doubt today, I encourage you, go to God with it. He's not going to be sitting there shaking his head at you, but he would invite your questions. And oftentimes, at least what I found for me, is he'll remind me of the things that he's done in my life, of how he's shown up. And he's not sitting there upset with me, but he's always ready to give me an answer and to guide me back towards him. And so I just wanted to encourage you with that from what I read, that God is not mad at us when we doubt, but instead he is gracious with us and always reminds us of the truth. This has helped me so much. I hope this helps you too. My name is Jordan. Follow for more Christian content.